I'm Alexander Pierce, once the pride of my family, CEO of Pierce Technologies, a $200 million legacy my grandpa Jack built. Then the espionage scandal hit. The board forced me out, and my family, people I trusted, turned on me. Rachel called me a failure. James mocked me with fake pity. Their laughter stung, but I stayed silent. Not out of weakness. I was waiting. Grandpa always said, "You only see the truth when you lose everything." That betrayal lit a fire in me. I wasn't done. I was ready to prove who I really am and who they are. This is where my story takes its first sharp turn. I'd spent years building Pierce Technologies into something my grandpa Jack would have been proud of, a $200 million empire born from his garage dreams. I was the golden boy, the one everyone praised to my face but resented behind my back. Then came the leak. Trade secrets slipped out, whispers of sabotage circled, and suddenly I wasn't the hero anymore. The board called it gross negligence and demanded I step down. My name, my legacy, sank like a stone. That's when I saw my family's true colors. It started with Rachel, my cousin who'd always had a chip on her shoulder. She'd flopped 3 startups, each one a bigger disaster than the last, and I'd bailed her out every time. Now she texted me with a smirk I could feel through the screen. Guess the golden boy's not so shiny anymore. James, the family's wannabe lawyer, didn't even pretend to care. "Need legal advice? I'm cheap now that you're broke," he jabbed, his words dripping with glee. Sarah, the youngest, who'd never worked a day in her life, chimed in at a family dinner, her voice syrupy sweet. "Maybe I should take over. Fresh blood, you know?" They weren't just kicking me while I was down, they were dancing on my grave. I'd expected disappointment, maybe even pity. But this was something else. It wasn't just about the company or the money Grandpa left behind. It was personal. They'd been waiting for this, salivating over my fall. Every forced smile I'd endured at Christmas dinners, every backhanded compliment, it all made sense now. They didn't love me. They envied me. And with me out of the picture, they saw their chance to claw at what I'd built. The tension thickened like smoke, choking out any shred of loyalty we'd once had. I could feel it in my chest, a weight pressing harder every time they spoke. Then came the shock that flipped everything upside down. Grandpa Jack died. Not slowly, not with warning, just gone, a heart attack in his sleep. I'd seen him 2 days before, tinkering with an old radio in his shed, his hands steady as ever. "Alex," he'd said, his voice low and gravelly, "watch the quiet ones. They're either your shield or your shadow." I'd nodded, half listening, figuring it was just another of his cryptic lessons. Now, those words echoed in my skull, sharp and insistent. He'd left me something, a riddle, a warning, and I didn't know what it meant yet. But I felt it. Something big was coming. I didn't cry at his funeral. Not because I wasn't torn up, I was, but because I couldn't let them see me break. Rachel smirked through her crocodile tears. James adjusted his tie like he was auditioning for Grandpa's role, and Sarah whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Bet he's out of the will now." They didn't mourn him. They tallied his estate like vultures circling a carcass. I stood there, hands in my pockets, taking it all in. My world was crumbling, my job, my reputation, my family, and yet, I didn't fight back. Not yet, I just watched. People might call that weakness, but it wasn't. It was patience. I'd learned that from Grandpa, from years of fixing circuits by his side. Sometimes you don't rush in. You wait, you study the board, you find the fault. I wasn't the guy who'd built a tech empire by accident. I'd faced competitors who'd tried to bury me, and I'd outsmarted them all. This was different, though. This was blood. And still, I held my tongue, letting their words pile up like evidence. Every sneer, every jab, it was fuel. I didn't know what Grandpa's last play was, but I trusted him. He'd never steered me wrong. So there I was, stripped of my title, surrounded by a family that smelled weakness and pounced. They thought I was done, a king dethroned. But I wasn't. Not even close. I could feel it in my gut, a storm brewing, quiet and slow. Grandpa's words kept me steady. Watch the quiet ones. I'd been watching, all right. Rachel's gloating, James's scheming, Sarah's ambition. They weren't hiding anymore, and neither would I when the time came. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something they'd never see coming. By the time Christmas dinner rolled around, I'd already lost more than most people could imagine. The company I'd poured my soul into, Pierce Technologies, Grandpa Jack's legacy, was slipping through my fingers. The board had sidelined me over that so-called espionage mess, and my family, they'd turned it into a sport. That night, I walked into the family mansion, the air thick with pine and hypocrisy. The chandelier sparkled, snowflakes glinted on the tree, but I wasn't at the head of the table anymore. I sat at the far end, a ghost in my own story, while they carved up my dignity like it was the turkey. Rachel kicked it off, swirling her wine like she owned the place. "So, Alex, how's unemployment treating you?" she said, her lips curling into a smirk. The table erupted, sharp, brittle laughs bouncing off the walls. James leaned in, his tie crooked from too much bourbon. "Bet you're missing those fancy boardroom chairs. What's next, flipping burgers?" Sarah, barely hiding her glee, chimed in. "I mean, someone's got to run the company now. Might as well be me." Even Mom, who'd always had my back, let out a dry laugh. "Well, Alex, nobody's perfect. Not even you." Each word hit like a punch, but I just stabbed at my plate, silent. They thought they'd won. I wasn't surprised. Not really. I'd seen the cracks in this. Family for years, Thanksgiving dinners where they'd hint at loans, birthdays where they'd fish for favors. But this was different. This was raw, unfiltered glee at my expense. I'd gone from their golden ticket to their punching bag, and they loved it. The room buzzed with their chatter, their voices climbing over each other, louder, sharper. I sat there, head down, feeling the weight of every glance. I wasn't just alone. I was prey. And yet something kept me steady. Grandpa Jack's voice, faint but clear, looping in my mind. "Look hard at who's laughing when you're down, Alex. That's when you'll see them." He'd said it years ago, over coffee in his cluttered garage, his hands stained with grease from some old gadget. I'd brushed it off then, too busy building an empire to dig into family drama. Now, it clicked. Rachel's smirk wasn't just spite, it was hunger. James's jabs weren't playful, they were calculated. Sarah's ambition wasn't innocent, it was a blade. Grandpa had known. He'd seen the vipers in our bloodline, and he'd tried to warn me. I looked up, scanning their faces, flushed with wine and victory, and felt a chill. This wasn't a dinner. It was a reckoning. The tension coiled tighter when the doorbell rang. 8 o'clock sharp, the butler shuffled in, his voice cutting through the noise. "Mr. Harrison's here. Says it's urgent." Rachel frowned, setting her glass down hard. "The will's tomorrow. What's this about?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Harrison stepped into the room, his gray suit crisp, a leather briefcase in hand. The air shifted, laughter faded, forks clinked against plates. He wasn't just Grandpa's lawyer. He was a storm cloud, heavy with something I couldn't name yet. My pulse kicked up. Whatever was coming, it was big. "Evening, folks," Harrison said, his tone calm but firm. "I've got something from Jack. He wanted it delivered tonight." James scoffed, crossing his arms. This better be good. Sarah rolled her eyes, but Mom went still, her fingers tightening on her napkin. I leaned back, watching. Harrison didn't flinch. He just set his briefcase on the table, the snap of the latch loud as a gunshot. My family stared, caught off guard, and for the first time all night they were quiet. I could have smiled, but I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't random. Grandpa had planned it, every second of this moment, and I'd been too buried in my own mess to see it coming. 3 months since he'd died, 3 months of silence and shame, and now this. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something else. Hope, maybe, or dread. Harrison pulled out an envelope, thick and sealed, and I swear the room held its breath. Jack left instructions, he said, glancing at me. Alex, he said you'd know when to listen. I nodded, slow and deliberate. The others squirmed, Rachel's smirk gone, James's bravado shrinking. They didn't get it yet, but I was starting to. Grandpa's words weren't just a warning. They were a map. And whatever Harrison was about to unfold, it was going to tear this night, this family, apart. I was ready. This is the moment everything broke open. Christmas dinner had been a slow burn. My family's taunts, their smug grins, the way they'd shoved me to the edge of the table like I didn't belong. Then Harrison walked in, Grandpa Jack's lawyer, carrying a briefcase and a weight I couldn't place. The room went quiet, forks hovering midair. He set a tablet down, tapped the screen, and there was Grandpa. Tired, gray, but with that spark in his eyes I'd known since I was a kid. If you're seeing this, he said, his voice crackling through the speakers, then Alex is down and you're all celebrating. Let's see who's laughing now. My heart stopped. Rachel froze, wine glass trembling in her hand. James's smirk vanished. Sarah's eyes darted to the door. Grandpa leaned closer on the screen like he could see us. The leak at Pierce Technologies? That was me. And Alex. We faked it, every memo, every whisper, to test you. Gasps ripped through the room. I didn't move. I'd carried this secret for 3 months, biting my tongue while the world called me a failure. Now it was time. Harrison nodded at me, calm as ever. Go on, show them, he said. I stood, slow and steady, and pointed at the tablet. Roll the footage. The screen split, security cam clips flickering to life. There was Rachel, sneaking into my office after hours, snapping photos of confidential files I'd left out like bait, dates stamped across months. She'd sold them for a fat payout, thinking she'd hit the jackpot. Next, James, bank statements flashing, client funds he'd siphoned into his own accounts, smirking like he'd never get caught. Then Sarah, fake resumes she'd sent to the board, claiming experience she'd never earned. Her references just actors on speed dial. The evidence piled up, cold and undeniable. Rachel's glass hit the table, wine pooling red. This isn't real, she stammered. James lunged forward. You set us up. Sarah just sobbed, mascara streaking. I let the chaos settle, then spoke, my voice low but firm. 3 months. I watched you gloat, scheme, stab me in the back. I didn't say a word, not when the board fired me, not when you laughed in my face. It was all a lie. I never lost my job. Grandpa and I planned this to see who'd stay loyal. The room spun. Mom's jaw dropped, her napkin crumpled in her lap. Harrison cleared his throat, pulling out a thick envelope. Jack's will, he said. Updated. Rachel, James, Sarah, you're out. Your shares? Gone. The company? Still Alex's. Always was. Grandpa's voice cut back in, sharp as a blade. I built this family's legacy with my hands. Alex guarded it with his heart. "You three? You'd burn it down for $1. I'm done with you." The screen went black. Silence swallowed us, thick, suffocating. Rachel screamed, "You can't do this." James shoved his chair back, face ashen. "I'll sue," Sarah wailed. "I didn't mean it." But I just stood there, feeling the weight lift. 3 months of shame, of headlines tearing me apart. It was worth it. They'd shown themselves, and I'd won. I'd made the call to play along back in September, sitting with Grandpa in his shed. He'd looked at me, eyes heavy with years, and said, "Alex, sometimes you gotta fall to rise. Trust me on this." I did. I let the board stage my exit, fed Rachel fake intel, watched James dig his hole, ignored Sarah's lies. It hurt, God, it hurt, to see my name dragged through the mud, to hear Mom laugh with them. But I'd promised Grandpa I'd protect what he'd built, even if it meant losing myself for a while. Now here I was, still standing. Harrison tucked the tablet away. "There's more," he said, voice steady. "Jack left Alex everything, company control, his estate, all of it. You three, you're done here." Security stepped in, shadows in the doorway. Rachel clawed at the tablecloth. James cursed under his breath. Sarah begged through tears. I didn't flinch. "Family doesn't do this," I said, my gaze locking on each of them. "You did. Goodbye." They were hauled out, voices fading down the hall. Mom reached for me, whispering, "Alex, I shook my head. Not now. I'd faced the fire and I'd come out whole. Grandpa's plan, our plan, had worked. The truth was out and I was free. The dining room was a battlefield, Rachel's screams still echoing, James's threats hanging heavy, Sarah's sobs choking the air. Grandpa's video had just ripped the mask off my family, exposing their greed, their betrayal. Harrison, cool as ever, had laid out the will. They were cut off. I was still CEO, and Grandpa's fortune, $1.2 billion, was mine. The truth was out. A grenade detonated at the heart of our Christmas dinner. Now it was my move. I pushed my chair back, stood tall, and faced them. "Enough," I said, my voice steady, cutting through their chaos. Rachel's eyes blazed, her nails digging into the tablecloth. "You can't do this, Alex. We're family." James snarled, "I'll fight this, watch me." Sarah whimpered, "Please, I didn't mean it." I didn't flinch. "You made your choices," I told them, slow and deliberate. "You sold me out, laughed when I fell. That's not family." I nodded to the doorway, where 3 security guards waited, big guys in black, silent as stone. "Take them out," I said. They moved in, calm and quick. Rachel kicked, James cursed, Sarah begged, but they were gone in minutes, dragged into the cold night. Mom reached for my hand, her voice trembling. "Alex, I'm sorry, I didn't know." I pulled away, gentle but firm. "You laughed too, Mom. I needed you and you weren't there." Her face crumpled, tears welling, but I couldn't soften, not yet. I'd spent months swallowing their venom, letting the world think I'd failed, all to protect Grandpa's legacy. Forgiveness wasn't mine to give right now. I turned away, the room emptying out, leaving just me and Harrison. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Jack would have been proud," he said. I nodded, staring at Grandpa's empty chair, its worn leather glowing under the chandelier. It wasn't just a seat, it was him, his lessons, his trust in me. The fallout hit fast. By morning, the cops had Rachel, James, and Sarah in cuffs, her offshore accounts traced, his embezzlement exposed, her lies unraveled. The news flipped overnight. Pierce Tech CEO clears name in bold sting. My phone buzzed with calls, board members, investors, even rivals, all singing my praises now. Pierce Technologies wasn't just saved, it was mine again, stronger than ever. I walked into my office that week, the weight of those $1.2 billion settling on my shoulders, not a burden, but a shield. I'd rebuilt it all, brick by brick, just like Grandpa taught me. But it wasn't over. That empty chair stuck with me. I'd hung Grandpa's photo on my wall, him in his old flannel, smiling over a busted radio we'd fixed together. Every time I looked at it, I saw more than a man. I saw loyalty, the kind he'd drilled into me, the kind my family never had. "Blood don't make family, Alex," he'd said once, grease on his hands, coffee on his breath. "Trust does." I'd nodded then, a kid who didn't get it. Now I did. Rachel, James, Sarah, they'd chosen cash over kin. I'd chosen him. That chair was my reminder. Some things you fight for, even when it costs you everything. I sat alone that first night back, the mansion quiet, the tree lights flickering. Mom sent flowers the next day, a card scribbled with "Forgive me?" I set it aside, unopened. She'd been my rock once, but when I'd hit bottom, she'd joined the chorus kicking me down. I wasn't ready to let that go. Maybe someday, but not now. The wounds were still fresh. 3 months of silence, of headlines screaming my shame, of nights wondering if I'd lost it all for nothing. I hadn't. I'd won. But victory doesn't erase the scars. The company roared back, stock up, deals flowing, the rot cut out. I leaned into it, working late, rebuilding what they'd tried to tear down. Grandpa's chair stayed empty at every dinner after that, a silent witness to what we'd pulled off. People asked me later how I did it, how I faced them down, took the hit, came out on top. I'd just point to that photo and say, "He showed me how." It wasn't about the money or the title. It was about keeping my word to the one guy who'd never doubted me. That's the real win. Pierce Technologies didn't just survive, it thrived. With the dead weight gone, Rachel, James, Sarah, the company grew stronger, like a tree pruned of rot. I walked into my office that first week back, hung Grandpa Jack's photo on the wall. Him in his old flannel, grinning over a junkyard find we'd fixed together. It wasn't just a picture, it was my anchor, a reminder of what family really means. Not blood, but trust. I dove into work, rebuilding with a fire I hadn't felt in years. Mom sent flowers a few days later, a note tucked inside, "Can we talk?" I set it on my desk, unopened. She'd stood with them, laughed when I was down. I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. That wound still ached, a quiet scar from months of betrayal. Maybe someday, but not now. Grandpa's words stayed with me. Sometimes you gotta lose it all to see who you are and who they are. He was right. I'd lost everything, only to find myself. The company's future stretched wide open. But my family's? That's a story still unwritten. Thanks for watching my story unfold. If it hit home, drop a like. It means the world. Subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss what's next. See you in the next chapter.